The ancient catastrophe. The alien Prion homeworld quaked with apocalyptic explosions, billions of alien screams shattering the night skies as human warships rained hellfire from above. In the year 2173, an ancient vendetta was at last being settled in blood. 7,000 years ago, the Priorians obliterated Earth, wiping humanity's homeworld from the stars. But unbeknownst to the aliens, a single human ship escaped, carrying a small group in cryostasis. As centuries turned to millennia, the human refugees slumbered in a secret virtual reality, their minds endlessly sharpening toward one goal: revenge. Now, the Priorians' long-forgotten sin had come back to haunt them. Alarms blared inside a bunker as two scholars, Crayon and Silo, reeled from the devastation of the human assault. In a somber, dimly lit study surrounded by ancient star charts and tomes detailing humanity's erasure, Crayon broke the grim silence. "Remember, young Silo, how our ancestors foolishly believed they had exterminated the human race," Crayon said. "They thought they could simply erase their mistake by obliterating the planet from orbit, turning it into a lifeless husk." Silo leaned closer, eager to learn even as distant detonations rocked the bunker. "Little did they know," Crayon continued, "that a small group of humans, led by the brilliant and tenacious Ralph Stevens, had managed to escape the carnage aboard a hastily constructed sleeper ship. For millennia, they drifted through the cosmos, their bodies preserved in cryogenic stasis while their minds were linked to a vast virtual reality, allowing them to continue learning, growing, and planning for the day they would return to exact their vengeance." Crayon's voice grew dark and somber as the roar of human landing craft grew louder in the distance. New time was running out for him and his entire species, and return they did, Silo. In the year 2173, the descendants of those survivors, armed with technology far surpassing our own, emerged from the depths of space to confront us, their eyes burning with a fury that had been smoldering for generations. "Unless we can find a way to turn back their wrath, I fear this will be our end." Silo couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Hold on, Crayon. How did the humans possibly survive drifting through space for 7,000 years? They must have run out of supplies." Crayon gave a knowing nod, a glimmer of begrudging respect in his eyes. "Ah, but that's where Ralph Stevens and his band of survivors showed their true genius. They invented an advanced system to extract the raw elements they needed directly from space itself. Using cutting-edge nanotechnology, they could gather materials to sustain and even expand their ship as they traveled the stars." "That's impossible," Silo exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No one has ever managed to do that." "We thought so too," Crayon said with a dry chuckle. "But while we assumed they perished, the humans spent those millennia not just surviving but flourishing within their virtual reality network. They ran extensive simulations, perfecting their technology without the constraints of limited physical resources. By the time they finally emerged to take their revenge, their command of matter and energy was beyond anything we could imagine." Crayon leaned back in his chair, gazing into the distance pensively as more explosions shook the bunker. In an ironic twist of fate, the very actions of our ancestors to eradicate the humans had the opposite effect. Destroying their homeworld gave them the motivation and the means to eclipse us in every conceivable way. Our attempt to wipe them out forged them into something far more formidable than we ever could have anticipated. Silo couldn't stop himself from standing up, his hands balled into fists. "What? They just let the humans land here after everything they've done. Why didn't we obliterate them the moment they entered our star system?" Crayon sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're still thinking like the old Prion Empire, Silo." We had grown complacent, secure in our belief that no one could challenge us. When the humans arrived with their message of peace, our leaders saw it as an opportunity to show off our might, to intimidate them into submission. Silo began to pace the room, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. "So what happened when they landed? Did our leaders even bother to bring security?" "Oh, they did," Crayon said, a hint of irony in his voice. "A grand procession was arranged, with Ralph Stevens and his crew escorted by our most elite warriors. The streets were lined with cheering crowds, all eager to catch a glimpse of these strange visitors from a world we thought long dead. Tylo stopped pacing, turning to face Cran. And then what? Did they attack? Crayon shook his head. No, that's the thing. They didn't do anything. They simply walked alongside our guards, their faces impassive, their hands clasped behind their backs. It was as if they were completely unfazed by the grandeur and might of our empire. Silo's brow furrowed. I don't understand. What was their plan? Patience, young one, Kron said, holding up a hand. The humans were brought before our Grand Council, the very same council that had ordered the destruction of Earth all those millennia ago. Ralph Stevens stepped forward, his eyes locked on the Prion leaders. And that's when he began to speak. Tylo leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. What did he say? Crown's voice grew quiet, almost reverent. He told them a story, Xylo. The story of Earth, of the vibrant civilization that had once thrived there. He spoke of the beauty of their world, the dreams and aspirations of its people. And then he described in vivid detail the day our ships arrived, the horror and devastation that followed. Xylo swallowed hard, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. And how did our leaders react? At first, they were dismissive, Kron said, his eyes distant. They scoffed at the idea that the destruction of a single planet could matter in the grand scheme of things. But as Ralph Stevens continued to speak, as he painted a picture of the suffering and loss his people had endured, something began to change. The room fell silent, save for the distant rumble of explosions. Silo could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the enormity of the moment. What changed, Cran? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cran turned to him, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and awe. The Prions, Silo, for the first time in our history, began to question our actions, to see the consequences of our arrogance and cruelty. And that's when Ralph Stevens made his final move. Tylo slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling. The idea that the humans had walked into the heart of the Prion Empire, unarmed and unprotected, seemed utterly inconceivable. He shook his head in disbelief, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. But Crayon, how could they possibly have been safe? Our leaders, our warriors, they could have struck them down where they stood. Crayon leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a mixture of admiration and fear. Ah, but that's just it, Clasilo. They had a weapon far more powerful than any blade or blaster. They had the truth. The power of truth. Crayon stood up, pacing the room as he continued his tale. You see, during their long exile, the humans developed a technology that allowed them to forge a deep empathetic connection with any sentient being. They could share their thoughts, their emotions, their memories, all with a single touch. Xylo's eyes widened, his mouth falling open in shock. That's impossible. No species has ever achieved such a thing. We thought so too, Kron nodded, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. But the humans had spent centuries perfecting this ability in their virtual reality simulations. They had honed it to the point where they could establish a connection with even the most hostile of species. He stopped pacing, turning to face Tylo directly. And that's exactly what they did with our leaders. When Ralph Stevens and his crew stood before the Supreme Council, they didn't come armed with weapons or threats. No, they came armed with something far more powerful. Cran's voice dropped to a whisper, his words heavy with the weight of revelation. They showed our leaders the truth, Xylo, the full extent of the suffering they had caused, the countless lives they had destroyed, the scars they had left on the human psyche. They forced them to feel every moment of pain, every cry of anguish, every last shred of despair. Tylo felt a chill run down his spine, his heart pounding in his chest. And what happened then? Crayon's face grew somber, his eyes distant. It shook them to their very core, Tylo. For the first time in our history, Our leaders were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. They saw themselves through the eyes of their victims, felt the weight of their own cruelty pressing down upon them. He sat back down, his voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, something changed. Something fundamental. The Prions, the mighty conquerors of the galaxy, were brought to their knees by the truth. And that's when Ralph Stevens made his final move. Dilo sat stunned, his mouth agape as he processed Cran's words. They apologized, just like that. Cran shook his head. Not at first. Our leaders resisted, refusing to believe our glorious conquest could be anything but justified. But Ralph Stevens and his crew persisted. Day after day, week after week, they shared their stories, memories, and pain. Cran paused to take a swig from his flask, the amber liquid sloshing. He wiped his mouth before continuing. Little by little, something shifted. Our leaders, so used to seeing other species as beneath us, began to view the humans as equals. The weight of our sins started to sink in. Dilo struggled to wrap his head around it. But after all we did, how could they possibly forgive us? Cran smiled sadly. That's just it, Dilo. Forgiveness wasn't what they wanted, not really. They sought understanding, a chance to stop history from repeating. They showed our leaders that true power comes not from subjugating others, but from empathy and cooperation. Leaning back, Cran pressed on. And so, in an unprecedented move, the Supreme Council did the unthinkable. They apologized, acknowledged the atrocities of our past, and vowed to work alongside humans toward a better future for all. Dilo shook his head in disbelief. I still can't believe it, that they would just. His words trailed off as another explosion rocked the bunker, the roar of human warships growing louder overhead. Cran leaned forward, his voice urgent. The apology was just the beginning, Xylo. What came next was even more revolutionary. Our leaders began to dismantle the very foundations of our empire, the belief systems that had justified our cruelty for so long. Xylo's eyes widened. Dismantle? What do you mean? They started with our education system, Cran explained, his finger tracing patterns on the dusty table. For generations, we had been taught that the Prions were the superior species, that it was our right, no, our duty, to conquer and subjugate. But now, our leaders insisted on teaching the truth. Cran reached into a drawer, pulling out a small holographic projector. He placed it on the table and tapped a button, bringing to life a shimmering image of a human woman, her face etched with sorrow, as she cradled a lifeless child in her arms. This, Cran said softly, is one of their most famous sculptures. It's called The Mother's Lament. The humans created it during their exile as a testament to all the lives lost when our ancestors destroyed their world. Xylo leaned in, his eyes transfixed by the raw emotion emanating from the hologram. The woman's grief was palpable, her anguish so vivid it seemed to reach through the centuries to touch his very soul. I never imagined. Xylo whispered, his voice trailing off as he struggled to find the words. Cran nodded. None of us did. We had been taught to see the humans as weak and inferior, but their art showed us the depth of their spirit, the resilience of their hearts. He tapped the projector again, and the image shifted to a painting of a vast, star-filled sky, a lone ship silhouetted against the cosmos. This one is called The Long Journey Home, Cran explained. It represents the humans' unwavering determination to survive, to find their way back from the brink of extinction. Dilo couldn't tear his eyes away. The painting seemed to pulse with an energy all its own, a testament to the indomitable human will. And this, Cran said, bringing up a final image, is perhaps the most powerful of all. The hologram shimmered, resolving into a deceptively simple scene. Two hands, one human, one Prion, clasped together in a gesture of unity. They call it the bridge, Cran said softly, a symbol of the bond they hope to forge between our species, a future built on understanding and cooperation. The cultural exchange. Kylo sat back, his mind reeling. He had always been taught that art was a frivolous pursuit, a waste of time better spent honing one's combat skills. But now, confronted with the sheer emotional power of the human works, he began to understand. They shared these with our people. Silo asked, his voice hushed with awe. Crown nodded. They did. They set up displays in our public squares, broadcast their music over our communication networks. They even worked with our own artists, encouraging them to explore new forms of expression. Xylo shook his head in disbelief. And it worked. Our people actually listened. Not all of them, Kron admitted. Some were too set in their ways, too blinded by hate and prejudice. But others began to see the humans in a new light. They began to question the very foundation of our society, the beliefs that had justified our conquest for so long. He leaned back, his eyes distant. It was a slow process. Silo. Change never comes easy, especially for a proud warrior race like ours. But bit by bit, heart by heart, the human's message began to take hold. Silo sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Kran's words. He had always believed in the righteousness of the Prion way, in the glory of their conquests. But now, faced with the undeniable truth of the human experience, he felt something shift deep within him. And now? Silo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Kran met his gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Now, Xylo, we stand at a crossroads. The human's message has taken root, but there are still those who resist, who cling to the old ways. The battle for the soul of our species is far from over. As if to punctuate his words, another explosion rocked the bunker, showering them in dust and debris. The human ships were getting closer, their onslaught unrelenting. Xylo grabbed Kran's arm, his eyes wide with urgency. But surely the humans must see that we've changed, that we're not the same species that destroyed their world. Kran shook his head sadly. I fear it may be too late for that. Xylo. The wounds we inflicted run too deep, the scars too fresh. The humans have come for retribution, and I cannot say that we do not deserve it. Xylo slumped back in his chair, his heart heavy with the weight of their past sins. He had always dreamed of glory in battle, of conquering new worlds in the name of the Prion Empire. But now, faced with the consequences of their actions, he saw only the folly of their ways. So what do we do, Kran? Silo asked, his voice thick with despair. How do we make them see that we've changed, that we want to be better? Kran leaned forward, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. We fight, Silo. Not with weapons, but with the very thing the humans use to reach us. Art. We show them that their message has taken hold, that we are ready to build a new future together. He stood up, his voice ringing with conviction. We may not be able to undo the sins of our past, but we can sure as hell try to build a better tomorrow. And that starts with reaching out to the humans, even in the midst of their assault. Xylo rose to his feet, his heart pounding with a newfound sense of purpose. He may not have understood the power of art before, but now he saw it as their only hope, their only chance to forge a new path forward. Then let's do it, Xylo said, his voice trembling with determination. Let's show the humans that we're ready to listen, to learn, to change. Let's fight for the future we know is possible. Crown clapped him on the shoulder, a grim smile on his face. Aye, Xylo. Let's give them a fight they'll never forget. Not with blasters and ships, but with the very essence of our souls. And with that, the two Prions strode out of the bunker, ready to face the human onslaught armed not with weapons, but with the power of art, of understanding, of hope for a better tomorrow. The unlikely alliance. Crown paused, a faraway look in his eyes as he recalled the impact of unity. He turned to Xylo, his voice filled with quiet reverence. I was there, you know, at the premiere of the piece. It was held in the grand auditorium of Praeoria Prime, a venue usually reserved for the most important state functions. Xylo leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. What was it like? A smile tugged at the corners of Cran's mouth. It was transcendent. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled with prions from all walks of life. There was an air of tension, of uncertainty. Many were skeptical, wondering what a human and a prion could possibly create together. He closed his eyes, the memory washing over him. But then the music began. It started softly, a single human voice joined by a prion-stringed instrument. Gradually, more voices and instruments joined in, weaving together in a complex tapestry of sound. Tylo could almost hear it, the music painting a picture in his mind. What did it sound like? Cran struggled to find the words. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. The human and prion elements blended seamlessly, creating something entirely new. It was haunting, beautiful, and powerful all at once. He opened his eyes, fixing Tylo with an intense gaze. But it was more than just the music. It was the lyrics, the message behind the piece. They spoke of the pain of loss, of the struggle to understand and forgive. But they also spoke of hope, of the possibility of a better future. Tylo felt a chill run down his spine. And the audience, how did they react? Cran let out a long, slow breath. At first, there was silence, a stunned, awestruck silence. And then, as the final notes faded away, the auditorium erupted. Applause, cheers, tears. It was a moment of pure, raw emotion. He leaned back in his chair, his voice soft. In that moment, something changed. You could feel it in the air, a shift in the very fabric of our society. For the first time, prions were seeing humans not as enemies or inferiors, but as equals, as partners in a shared future. Tylo shook his head, marveling at the power of a single piece of music, and it spread. The message of unity. Cran nodded. Like wildfire, the recording of the performance was broadcast across the empire, played in homes, schools, and public spaces. It became a touchstone, a rallying cry for those who believed in a different path. He sighed, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. Of course, not everyone was convinced. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who saw the human message as a threat to our way of life. Tylo frowned. What happened to them? Cran shrugged. Some were won over in time. Others, well, let's just say that change is never easy. There were protests, even riots in some parts of the empire. But the tide had turned, and there was no going back. He fixed Tylo with a piercing stare. And that, young one, is the power of art. It can change minds, hearts, even the course of history itself. The humans understood that, and they wielded it like a weapon of peace and understanding. Tylo sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling as he tried to process the enormity of what he had just heard. The tale of Ralph Stevens and his crew, the humans who had changed the course of galactic history, was one that would be told and retold for generations to come. A story of hope, of resilience, and of the unbreakable spirit of a species that had refused to be broken, even in the face of the greatest adversity the universe could muster. A legacy of hope. Tylo leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide with amazement. So the Alliance really did it then. They managed to create a lasting peace throughout the galaxy. Cran nodded, a wistful smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, for a time. The humans and the prions, along with their many allies, ushered in a new era of cooperation and discovery. It was a golden age, Tylo, a time of unparalleled progress and prosperity. But even as he spoke, Cran's expression began to shift, a shadow passing over his face. But the story of Ralph Stevens and his crew, the heroes who had made it all possible, took a tragic turn. Tylo leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. What happened to them? Cran sighed, his shoulders slumping as if under a great weight. The long years of cryogenic sleep, the stress of their mission, it had all taken a toll on their bodies and minds. One by one, they began to fall ill, succumbing to strange neurological disorders, and degenerative diseases. Tylo gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. But surely, with all the advanced medicine of the Alliance, they could have been saved. Crayon shook his head sadly. They tried, Silo. The greatest scientific minds from across the galaxy worked tirelessly to find a cure. But in the end, the damage was too great. The price of their sacrifice was higher than anyone could have imagined. He paused, his voice catching in his throat as he continued. Ralph Stevens, the last of the original crew, passed away, surrounded by friends and allies from 100 different worlds, a testament to the lives he had touched, the difference he had made. A single tear rolled down Crayon's weathered cheek, glistening in the dim light of the bunker. And so, the story of the humans who saved the galaxy comes to a bittersweet end. Their legacy lives on in the alliance they helped forge, in the countless lives they changed for the better. But the price of that legacy was high, paid in blood and sacrifice by those brave few who dared to dream of a better future. Tylo sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling as he tried to process the enormity of what he had just heard. The tale of Ralph Stevens and his crew, the humans who had changed the course of galactic history, was one that would be told and retold for generations to come. A story of hope, of resilience, and of the unbreakable spirit of a species that had refused to be broken, even in the face of the greatest adversity the universe could muster. Xylo's jaw dropped. They created art for the Zarians. Crown nodded. They did, and when they unveiled it at the negotiating table, the Zarians were stunned. For the first time in their history, they saw themselves reflected in the eyes of another species, not as monsters, but as beings with their own hopes, dreams, and fears. He sat back, a look of wonder on his face. It was a turning point. Xylo. The Zarians began to listen, to engage in real dialogue with the humans and their allies. Slowly but surely, the walls of mistrust and hatred began to crumble. Xylo shook his head, amazed. I never knew the power of art could reach so far, could touch even the hardest of hearts. Crown smiled. That's the beauty of it, Xylo. Art has a way of speaking to the soul, of transcending the barriers that divide us. The humans understood this, and they used it to forge a new path, one of unity and understanding. He looked out the window at the ship still circling overhead. And now, as we face this new challenge, we must remember the lessons they taught us. We must reach out, even to those who seek our destruction, and find the common ground that binds us all. Xylo nodded, a new sense of purpose filling him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with the humans' example to guide them, he believed anything was possible. Crayon turned back to him, his eyes blazing with determination. So what do you say, Xylo? Are you ready to be the change you wish to see in the world? Xylo stood up, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let the human sacrifice be in vain. He would fight, not with weapons, but with the power of understanding, of compassion, of art. And as he followed Crayon out of the bunker into the chaos of the human invasion, he felt a new sense of hope stirring within him. For the first time in his life, he saw the possibility of a different way, a better way. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would do whatever it took to make that possibility a reality. The power of unity. Xylo sat back in his chair, his eyes wide with amazement. So the Alliance really did it then. They managed to create a lasting peace throughout the galaxy. Crown nodded, a wistful smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, for a time. The humans and the Prans, along with their many allies, ushered in a new era of cooperation and discovery. It was a golden age, Xylo, a time of unparalleled progress and prosperity. But even as he spoke, Cran's expression began to shift, a shadow passing over his face. But the story of Ralph Stevens and his crew, the heroes who had made it all possible, took a tragic turn. Tylo leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. What happened to them? Crown sighed, his shoulders slumping as if under a great weight. The long years of cryogenic sleep, the stress of their mission, it had all taken a toll on their bodies and minds. One by one, they began to fall ill, succumbing to strange neurological disorders and degenerative diseases. Tai Lo gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. But surely, with all the advanced medicine of the Alliance, they could have been saved. Crayon shook his head sadly. They tried. Silo. The greatest scientific minds from across the galaxy worked tirelessly to find a cure. But in the end, the damage was too great. The price of their sacrifice was higher than anyone could have imagined. He paused, his voice catching in his throat as he continued. Ralph Stevens, the last of the original crew, passed away, surrounded by friends and allies from 100 different worlds, a testament to the lives he had touched, the difference he had made. A single tear rolled down Crayon's weathered cheek, glistening in the dim light of the bunker. And so, the story of the humans who saved the galaxy comes to a bittersweet end. Their legacy lives on in the Alliance they helped forge, in the countless lives they changed for the better. But the price of that legacy was high, paid in blood and sacrifice by those brave few who dared to dream of a better future.